Markets have always been ruled by mathematics, not just money. This hidden truth connects the ancient world to our own. For thousands of years, entire economies ran on sacred mathematical codes that set prices and guided daily trade with precision. By the end of this story, you will see our modern financial world in a completely new light. Who created the first economic algorithm, and what ancient device was the original computer for merchants? How does a 4,000-year-old price-fixing law still influence us today? What does it mean that our most advanced digital markets are returning to these ancient principles? How much of your daily life is shaped by an invisible math you never see? 4,000 years ago, in the bustling markets of Mesopotamia, a handful of clay could buy a field of grain. These were not just any pieces of clay, but carefully shaped tokens, each one a physical algorithm representing a specific commodity, a precise unit of value. A cone might equal a small measure of grain, a sphere a jar of oil. Every trade was a calculation, a simple arithmetic problem made solid in your hand. This was the dawn of market mathematics, where the very concept of value was forged in the fires of numerical systems. Standardized weights and measures became the first true market algorithms, rigid codes that ensured a shekel of silver was always a shekel, a bushel of barley always a bushel. These rules were not arbitrary. They were born from generations of observation, from seeing the patterns of harvest and need, and reaching a communal agreement on what was fair. This created a predictable economic world, a remarkable stability in an unpredictable age. Executing these rules fell to the scribes, the human computers of the ancient world. With sharpened reeds and wet clay tablets, they performed complex calculations for distributing grain to a city, calculating interest on a loan of silver, or determining the wages for a crew of laborers. Their work transformed abstract numbers into binding contracts and economic law. The development of cuneiform numerals was the final, crucial step, allowing these transactions to be permanently recorded. A row of wedge-shaped marks was no longer just math. It was proof, it was history, it was the ledger of civilization itself. From its very inception, trade was guided by this invisible hand of mathematics, a silent partner in every exchange. But this was only the beginning. How did these simple, physical rules evolve into something far more complex and powerful, something that could dictate the fate of empires? But these Mesopotamian tokens were just the seed. Centuries later, in the heart of ancient Babylon, this seed blossomed into a full-fledged legal and mathematical system that governed every aspect of commerce. Here, mathematics was not just a tool for trade. It was the law of the land, carved in stone for all to see. The famous Code of Hammurabi was far more than a list of crimes and punishments. It was the world's first comprehensive economic algorithm. It dictated precise rules for the entire marketplace. The code set a fixed interest rate on silver loans at 20% per year and on grain loans at 33.33%. Why the difference? It was a brilliant early risk calculation. Grain was bulky, perishable, and harder to transport than silver, so the algorithm baked that extra risk right into the price of the loan. This created a predictable financial landscape where everyone, from a wealthy merchant to a simple farmer, knew the exact cost of borrowing. Beyond loans, the code also enforced price controls on essential goods. Price of barley, oil, and wool were not left to the chaos of supply and demand alone. They were often set using fixed ratios and proportional relationships. If the price of barley was 1, the price of fine oil might be fixed at 12. This was a form of early price-fixing algorithm designed to prevent famine profiteering and ensure a basic level of fairness in the daily market. To power this regulated economy, Babylonian mathematicians developed some of the most advanced techniques the world had ever seen. Their clay tablets reveal they could calculate compound interest, a complex process of growth upon growth, and even solve quadratic equations to divide land fairly after a flood or settle complex inheritance disputes. These were not abstract academic exercises. Every calculation had a direct impact on market dynamics and social stability. Crucial to all of this was their unique number system. While we count in tens, the Babylonians used a base 60 system. This might seem strange, but it was a mathematical superpower. The number 60 is beautifully divisible by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, and 30. This made complex divisions and multiplications for large-scale trade, like splitting a massive shipment of grain among many traders, incredibly smooth and efficient. We still see the legacy of their system every time we look at a clock or a circle, both divided into 60 units. These legal and mathematical frameworks were the operating system for one of the world's first great civilizations. They demonstrate how codified algorithms, etched in stone and calculated on clay, could bring a remarkable stability and a sense of fairness to ancient markets. This Babylonian model set a powerful precedent, a blueprint for regulated commerce that would echo through the ages. But this raises a profound question. How did these rigid, written codes evolve into something even more dynamic, something that could think for itself? Far to the south, the lifeblood of Egypt was not silver but grain, and its economy was driven by a rhythm as predictable as the seasons. Every year, the Nile River would flood, wiping away the field boundaries that defined a farmer's livelihood. In the wake of the receding waters, the pharaoh's scribes would arrive with their knotted ropes, tools for applying a powerful market algorithm, geometry. They would meticulously remeasure every plot of land, calculating its area to determine the farmer's tax obligation for the coming year. This was a direct mathematical translation of land into debt, a calculation that fueled the entire state. But this system was not just about extraction, it was about survival. The same administrators who collected this grain tax stored it in vast, state-controlled granaries. These granaries were more than just warehouses, they were the memory of the system, a buffer against the inevitable lean years. When the harvests failed, sophisticated distribution algorithms would activate, ensuring a measured, equitable release of grain to prevent famine and maintain social order. This was a centralized mathematical command economy operating on a colossal scale. The proof is etched into ancient papyrus. The Rind mathematical papyrus, one of the world's oldest textbooks, is filled not with abstract theory, but with practical economic problems. It details exactly how to divide loaves of bread among men, or how to use different grades of grain to brew specific quantities of beer. These were the essential calculations for feeding the thousands of laborers who built the pyramids, a logistical nightmare solved with multiplication tables and a unique system of unit fractions. Every aspect of production, from the field to the table, was governed by a numerical code designed to maximize efficiency and maintain stability. The entire Egyptian economy can be seen as a single, grand algorithm for social cohesion, a direct mathematical response to the unpredictable gift of the Nile. This was resource management as a sacred duty, calculated with precision. But while Egypt perfected the algorithm of central control, another civilization was discovering the power of a decentralized, self-correcting system. How could a market, left to its own devices, possibly find its own balance? While the pharaohs ruled with a grand, centralized algorithm, the Greeks were discovering a different kind of mathematical truth in their bustling open-air markets, the agoras. Here, philosophy and commerce were not separate worlds, but two sides of the same coin. Thinkers like Pythagoras did not just see numbers as tools for calculation. They believed numbers were the very essence of reality, the hidden harmony of the universe. This profound belief echoed through the marketplace, transforming the simple act of trade into an expression of cosmic order. The central ideal was a fair exchange, and this fairness was not left to vague feelings. It was defined with mathematical precision through ratios and proportions. If a jar of wine was worth 2 bushels of wheat, that 1-to-2 ratio created a just price, a balanced equation that felt right to both buyer and seller. The philosopher Aristotle took this even further, pondering the very nature of economic value. He argued that for trade to be possible at all, there must be a common measure, a single unit that could express the value of a house, a meal, and a pair of sandals. This was a philosophical quest for the ultimate algorithm, a universal variable that could make all things comparable, a direct precursor to the idea of money as a pure mathematical unit. This mathematical thinking was intensely practical. A merchant selling wine from a large clay amphora did not just guess at its volume, they used geometry. By understanding the mathematical principles of a cylinder, they could calculate exactly how many smaller jugs it could fill, standardizing their sales and building trust with customers. Similarly, a trader selling fabric calculated its area using length and width, ensuring customers paid a price proportional to the material they received. This was applied mathematics in its purest form, turning abstract geometry into a tool for honest commerce. The Greeks even had a word for this underlying principle of balanced proportion, logos. While we often think of logos as logic or reason, in the marketplace it meant a harmonious, reasoned relationship between things. A commercial agreement had to have logos, a proportional fairness that made it stable and just. This embedded a sense of mathematical harmony into the very fabric of daily transactions, making the agora a place where the ideals of philosophy were tested and proven with every sale. The Greek market was not just a place to buy and sell. It was a living laboratory where abstract mathematical ideals met the concrete realities of human exchange. But this elegant system of proportional harmony would soon face its greatest challenge, from a civilization that would take the mathematics of trade and build an empire with it. The Roman Empire ran on numbers, its sprawling dominion stretching from the misty highlands of Britain to the sun-baked banks of the Euphrates, was not held together by legions alone, but by a sophisticated administrative system whose lifeblood was mathematical order. Roman law was a master algorithm of commerce, specifying precise formulas for inheritance, contracts, and debt. A father's estate was not divided by vague sentiment, but by a strict legal calculation, ensuring each heir received their exact, predetermined share. This created a predictable framework where a merchant in Gaul could form a contract with a shipowner in Alexandria, confident that the same numerical rules would apply, that the same logic would govern their agreement across thousands of miles. This predictability was the empire's silent economic engine. Even the right to collect taxes was governed by a brutal, high-stakes algorithm. Powerful individuals known as publicani would bid in complex auctions for the privilege of gathering taxes from a province. They had to calculate the risks, estimating the province's wealth, the potential for rebellion or poor harvests, and the costs of collection, all to arrive at a winning bid that would still guarantee them a profit. This was a market algorithm applied to the very act of governance, a system that outsourced state revenue to private calculation. the empire's money itself was a living, breathing algorithm. Roman coinage, with its strict denominations and enforced standards of metal purity, was a universal language of value. A denarius was not just a piece of silver, it was a trusted unit of account. Its value was backed by the state's guarantee, a promise etched in metal that allowed a Spanish farmer to sell his olive oil for coins he knew would be accepted for Egyptian linen or Syrian glass. This monetary algorithm dissolved the chaos of barter, creating a seamless, continent-spanning market. To make this possible, Roman engineers employed geometry and arithmetic on a heroic scale. They did not just build roads, they calculated their paths, ensuring the most efficient gradients and the straightest possible lines to move legions and goods with breathtaking speed. Aqueducts were not mere constructions, they were precise mathematical channels, their gentle, calculated slopes delivering life-giving water to cities, enabling the urban markets to thrive. Every harbor, with its perfectly aligned breakwaters, was a testament to applied mathematics enabling commerce. This numerical governance extended to the very heart of Roman power, its military. The pay for every legionary, from the rawest recruit to the seasoned centurion, was calculated to the last sesterce. The supply chains that fed and equipped these vast armies were miracles of meticulous bookkeeping, with scribes tracking every spear, every sack of grain, every sandal, ensuring the economic stability of the force that policed the world. The Roman Empire was, in its essence, a single, integrated market algorithm of staggering scale, proving that numerical order could bind a world together. The rhythmic click of beads on a wooden frame was the sound of commerce itself. In the marketplaces of ancient Rome, along the Silk Road in China, and across the medieval world, this simple device was the engine of trade. The abacus was far more than a calculator. It was the physical embodiment of market algorithms, a machine you could hold in your hands. Its ordered rows of beads made abstract arithmetic tangible, translating the complex mathematics of profit and loss into a series of swift, precise movements. A merchant could calculate a complex currency exchange, determine the total cost of a mixed shipment of spices, or work out his profit margin in real time, right at the point of sale. This was algorithmic thinking made fluid and fast, turning human thought into mechanical action. Across continents, cultures refined this tool to fit their unique commercial landscapes. The Romans used calculi, small pebbles moved along lines drawn in dust or on a counting board. The Chinese developed the sophisticated suanpan, with its upper and lower decks of beads allowing for hexadecimal calculations. The Russians created the skoti, a single row of beads on a wireframe, designed for their specific numerical notation. Each variant was a custom-built computer, optimized for the local numerical system and the particular demands of its marketplace. Mastering this device was not just about learning to count. It was a form of mental training that ingrained the logic of commercial algorithms into a merchant's very mind. Schools dedicated to the abacus trained generations of traders, teaching them to visualize problems, break them into steps, and arrive at a solution with unerring accuracy. This skill was a direct path to wealth and influence, a clear advantage in a competitive world. By putting such powerful calculation into the hands of everyday people, the abacus democratized the mathematics of trade. It was the world's first portable computer, a tool that made complex financial thinking accessible to anyone willing to learn its language. This widespread computational ability did not just speed up old transactions, it paved the way for entirely new ones, for more abstract and sophisticated financial instruments that would require an even greater leap of mathematical thinking. How could these physical calculations ever be captured, stored, and built upon by something other than the human mind? While Roman numerals were still being carved into stone, a mathematical revolution was taking shape in the East. The bustling markets of Baghdad and Damascus were laboratories for a new kind of economic thinking, one where faith, law, and numbers were woven into a single, seamless system. The very word we use for these market rules, algorithm, comes from the name of a Persian scholar, Al-Khwarizmi. His groundbreaking book on algebra gave merchants a powerful new toolkit, a way to solve for unknown variables in complex commercial disputes. Suddenly, a problem like dividing the profits from a risky sea voyage after accounting for ship damage and lost cargo was no longer a matter of guesswork. It became an equation to be solved with a single, fair answer. This mathematical precision was the engine of Islamic finance. Religious law prohibited usury, the charging of simple interest which might have stifled commerce. Instead, it sparked incredible innovation. Scholars developed sophisticated partnership contracts known as mudaraba, where one partner provided the capital and the other the labor. The profits were not fixed in advance, but were shared according to a pre-agreed ratio, a percentage that had to be calculated with absolute accuracy to honor the sacred trust between the partners. This was a risk-sharing algorithm, embedding fairness directly into the DNA of investment. Every trade caravan and every date harvest operated on these mathematical principles. Astronomers, using complex celestial calculations, created precise calendars that dictated not only the timings for daily prayers, but also the optimal seasons for planting and for travel. These calendars were algorithms for market timing, synchronizing the entire economic cycle with the cosmos itself. The movement of the stars told farmers when to bring their goods to market and informed merchants when the monsoon winds would be favorable for a journey across the Indian Ocean. Here, the sacred and the commercial were united, both governed by the same unchangeable divine mathematics. This system demonstrated that market algorithms could be more than just tools for profit. They could be expressions of a deeper ethical and spiritual order, a different path for organizing the entire world of trade. The great Champagne fairs were a chaotic symphony of commerce, a temporary city of cloth and coin where the dialects of a dozen lands collided. A merchant from Florence might arrive with bolts of silk, hoping to trade with a Flemish trader carrying English wool, all while using a mixture of French livers, Italian florins, and Byzantine bezants. This was an accountant's nightmare, a swirling vortex of values that threatened to devour profits through miscalculation alone. Out of this beautiful chaos emerged a financial algorithm of pure genius, the bill of exchange. It was a piece of paper that promised a future payment in a different currency at a different place. A merchant could buy goods in Champagne, give a bill to the seller, and that seller could then have the money collected from the merchant's agent back in, say, Genoa. This eliminated the incredible danger and bulk of transporting chests of gold across bandit-ridden roads. But the bill's value was not simple. It was a sophisticated calculation. Its price was a function of the current exchange rate between the two currencies, the length of time until the payment was due, and a discount based on the perceived trustworthiness of the merchant who issued it. This was a time value of money algorithm, written in ink and sealed with wax, allowing capital to flow safely across continents. To make this system work, merchant guilds enforced their own algorithms of trust. They established standard weights and measures, certified the quality of cloth and wine, and maintained lists of reputable traders. This created a predictable, rule-based environment where a merchant could do business with a stranger, relying on the system's integrity rather than personal knowledge. Then came the ledger. Double-entry bookkeeping transformed a simple list of sales and purchases into a verifiable mathematical model of the entire business. Every transaction was recorded twice as a debit in one account and a credit in another. The beauty of this system was its built-in error detection, its internal logic. If the total debits did not equal the total credits, the books did not balance and a mistake was found. This turned a merchant's financial records into a self-correcting algorithm, a dynamic map of his commercial health that could reveal profit, loss, and net worth at a glance. These were not just better tools, they were the birth of a new financial consciousness, one where abstract value could be tracked, transferred, and trusted across vast distances. This mathematical framework for risk and reward would soon face its ultimate test, not on land but on the open ocean. What happens when a single voyage can make or break a fortune, when the algorithms of trade must confront the terrifying randomness of the sea? A ship laden with silver from Potosi could upend the price of bread in Paris. This was the shocking reality of the 16th century, a phenomenon we now call the price revolution. For generations, the value of things had felt stable, rooted in the land and the labor required to produce them. Then, a flood of New World gold and silver poured into Europe, and the old certainties evaporated. The cost of grain, cloth, and rent began a long, relentless climb, creating a continent-wide inflation that baffled kings and crushed commoners. For the first time, people were forced to confront a terrifying new idea that the value of everything was not fixed, but was a number that could be changed by events on the other side of the world. Out of this chaos, a new kind of thinking was born. A French scholar named Jean Bodin carefully observed the patterns. He noticed that prices rose in direct proportion to the amount of new money entering the economy. It was a revolutionary insight, an early formulation of the quantity theory of money. He was beginning to model the market itself, to see it not as a collection of individual trades, but as a vast, interconnected system that responded to mathematical forces. This was the dawn of economics as a predictive science. Monarchs suddenly found their treasuries stretched thin, their fixed tax revenues buying less and less with each passing year. They were forced to recalibrate their entire fiscal systems, to find new algorithms for revenue that could keep pace with a shifting economic reality. For merchants, the very definition of a good deal changed overnight. A long-term contract signed one year could become a financial roue in the next as the real value of the promised payment melted away. Debtors rejoiced as the real burden of their loans shrank, while creditors scrambled to protect their wealth. The concept of value itself was being untethered from the intrinsic worth of an object, a bushel of wheat, and was instead becoming a number dancing to the tune of abstract, impersonal market forces. This painful, decades-long lesson taught the Western world that an economy was not just a simple ledger, but a complex, dynamic system that could be observed, measured, and perhaps one day even predicted. The search for the algorithm that could explain its movements had truly begun. A nation's power could now be measured in a single, stark number, the balance of trade. This was the cold arithmetic of mercantilism, a grand economic theory that saw the world's wealth as a fixed pie. If one nation gained a larger slice, another necessarily lost. The ultimate goal was not just to trade, but to win this global calculation by ensuring the value of a kingdom's exports always, and definitively, exceeded the value of its imports. The prize was a continuous inflow of gold and silver, the only forms of wealth these early economists believed truly mattered. This was a national strategy built on a simple, powerful algorithm: export more than you import, accumulate precious metal, repeat. To execute this plan, states transformed their ports into centers of intense data collection. Customs officials were not just tax collectors, they were human calculators, perched at docksides with massive ledgers. Every bale of wool leaving for the continent, every barrel of sugar arriving from the colonies, was meticulously recorded, its value tallied. They used complex calculation tables to convert diverse goods into a common monetary value, creating a real-time, running total of the nation's commercial performance. This was macroeconomic management on a scale never before attempted, all powered by pen and paper. The most sophisticated algorithms of this era were not written in code but passed as acts of parliament. The British Navigation Acts were a perfect example. These laws were a set of logical commands designed to manipulate the flow of commerce. They stipulated that goods imported into England must be carried on English ships or on ships from the country that produced the goods. This was a brilliant piece of economic programming, a loop designed to cripple the Dutch shipping industry while systematically building Britain's own merchant marine and naval power. Every clause was an if-then statement directing the currents of global trade. Colonies were the ultimate variables in this mercantilist equation. They were not seen as fledgling societies, but as optimized economic assets. A colony like Jamaica existed to produce sugar, Virginia to produce tobacco, and New England to provide ships and timber, all according to a master plan drafted in London or Madrid. Trade between colonies and other nations was often forbidden, forcing a profitable, closed-loop system where raw materials flowed to the mother country and finished goods were sold back at a premium. The entire colonial project was a massive, state-enforced algorithm for resource extraction and wealth concentration. This was the first time political power had so deliberately and comprehensively harnessed numerical reasoning to steer an entire economy. The mercantilist state was a machine for calculating and capturing wealth, its policies a precursor to the complex economic models that guide modern nations. It created an interconnected, albeit fiercely competitive, global trading system, proving that algorithms could govern not just a marketplace, but the fate of empires. But what happens when you apply this same relentless calculation not to nations, but to the inner workings of a single, ordinary business? The answer would transform the world in a way no one could have predicted. The open ocean was a terrifying equation of unknown variables. A merchant's entire fortune, loaded onto a single ship, could vanish into a storm or fall prey to pirates, leaving him with nothing. This existential dread forced a revolutionary question. Could you put a number on disaster? The answer was yes, and it gave birth to the modern insurance industry. In the coffee houses of London and Amsterdam, underwriters began to act as human calculators. They did not rely on gut feeling, but on growing ledgers of data, records of past voyages. They calculated insurance premiums using a simple but powerful formula. The longer the voyage and the more valuable the cargo, the higher the risk, and thus the higher the price of the policy. A journey to the Caribbean during hurricane season cost far more to insure than a calm coastal trip. This was probability in action, turning the chaos of the sea into a predictable, manageable cost of doing business. This new mathematical approach to chance did not stop at the docks. In the salons of Paris, brilliant minds like Blaise Pascal and Pierre de Fermat were laying the formal foundations of probability theory through letters debating games of chance. Their abstract work found an immediate and hungry audience in the commercial world. The concept of expected value became a merchant's new compass. Instead of seeing a venture as a simple win or lose gamble, they could now calculate its probable worth. A sea voyage might have only a 60% chance of success, but if the profit from that success was enormous, its expected value could still make it a rational investment. This was a fundamental shift from thinking in certainties to thinking in probabilities. Governments and entrepreneurs were quick to see the potential. They designed complex financial schemes like lotteries and tontines, which were early forms of group investment. These were not mere games of luck, they were carefully engineered probability algorithms. Actuaries used mortality tables and probability calculations to set the price of annuities, ensuring the seller made a profit over the long run while offering the buyer a predictable income. A tontine pooled money from many investors, with the payouts increasing for the survivors as others passed away. A morbid but mathematically sound way to raise capital for everything from canals to wars. This was the ultimate algorithmic management of uncertainty. Risk was no longer a monster to be feared, but a variable to be calculated, priced, and distributed across thousands of people, creating a stable foundation for economic growth that would have been impossible in a world of pure chance. The market had learned to tame randomness itself. The French countryside of the 18th century was a living engine of wealth, and a small group of thinkers saw its entire rhythm as a mathematical truth. The Physiocrats looked past the bustling shops of Paris and declared that all true economic value sprang not from gold or trade, but from the land itself. Agriculture was the sole source of the surplus, the net product that fed the entire nation. To prove this radical idea, they created a revolutionary diagram, the tableau économique. This was no simple chart. It was a complex matrix of lines and numbers depicting the entire economy as a single, circulating system. It showed how the agricultural surplus flowed from the farming class, the only productive class, to the landowning class and the sterile class of artisans and merchants. The diagram calculated these flows with precision, tracing how money paid for goods and how those goods, in turn, supported further production. It was a snapshot of the economic engine at work, a mathematical algorithm for national prosperity. This model led them to a powerful and controversial policy conclusion. If land was the only true source of wealth, they argued, then all other taxes were inefficient and burdensome. They proposed a single tax, the impôt unique, levied directly on the net product of the land itself. This was an algorithm for taxation, a formula designed to extract revenue at the very source of value without distorting the rest of the economy. By visualizing the economy as a mechanical system with inputs, outputs, and circular flows, the Physiocrats achieved something profound. They laid the intellectual groundwork for all modern economic modeling, proving that the complex, seemingly chaotic interactions of an entire market could be represented, understood, and even managed through mathematics. Their work was a direct precursor to the input-output models that guide our world today, a quiet revolution that began not in a bank but in a field of grain. Adam Smith saw the entire marketplace as a kind of natural computer. He never used the word algorithm, but his famous invisible hand describes precisely that, a decentralized system where millions of individual choices produce a stable, efficient outcome without any central planner. This was a self-correcting economic program running on the hardware of human nature. Smith observed that our innate self-interest, when channeled through competition, acts like a regulatory function. If a baker charges too much for bread, customers will simply go to another baker, forcing the price back down to a level that just covers the cost of flour, yeast, and a reasonable profit. This constant push and pull naturally finds the equilibrium price, the exact point where supply meets demand. The system corrects itself. To explain this, Smith delved into the very source of value. He proposed a labor theory of value, suggesting that the price of a good should, in a fundamental sense, reflect the amount of labor required to produce it. If it takes twice as long to hunt a deer as it does to catch a beaver, then one deer should naturally be worth 2 beavers. This was his attempt to find a mathematical constant, a foundational number beneath the shifting surface of market prices. Yet Smith was a sharp enough observer to see the complications. He knew that supply and demand could dramatically warp this underlying labor value, creating a dynamic and sometimes unpredictable pricing algorithm. His most powerful illustration of this mathematical thinking was not in theory, but in a simple pin factory. He described how one worker toiling alone could scarcely make 20 pins in a day. But when the process was broken down into 18 distinct steps, with each worker specializing in a single task like drawing out the wire, sharpening the point, or attaching the head, a small team could produce thousands upon thousands of pins each day. This was not a simple linear improvement. This was exponential growth in output, a dramatic surge in productivity achieved by reprogramming the very method of work. The division of labor was an algorithm for supercharging production. With Smith's work, economics was no longer just a collection of observations about trade and taxes. It became the science of systems. He showed that the chaotic-seeming hustle of the market was not chaos at all, but a pattern, a set of discoverable laws that could be predicted and analyzed. The market was a natural algorithm, and he had begun to decode its source code. This vision would completely reshape the modern world, but it also raised a new and troubling question. If the market was a mathematical system, what happened when that system broke down, when the invisible hand seemed to falter, leading not to prosperity, but to mass suffering and collapse? David Ricardo saw the world as a giant optimization problem. He and other classical economists took Adam Smith's foundational ideas and began constructing rigorous mathematical frameworks, turning the rich tapestry of commerce into a set of calculable variables. Their goal was audacious: to reduce the entire messy business of human society to clean, predictable equations. Ricardo's most famous contribution was his theory of comparative advantage, a deceptively simple algorithm for international trade. He demonstrated that even if one nation was better at producing every single good, both nations would still benefit from trade if they specialized in what they were relatively best at. The logic was counterintuitive but mathematically unassailable. Imagine Portugal could produce both wine and cloth more efficiently than England. Instead of trying to do everything, Portugal should focus its land and labor on wine, where its advantage was greatest, and trade that wine for English cloth. England, though less efficient at both, should focus on cloth where its disadvantage was smallest. This was a formal proof that cooperation, driven by mathematical self-interest, could create more wealth for everyone. Ricardo applied the same precise reasoning to the question of land. His theory of rent was a brilliant piece of spatial mathematics. He argued that the value of a piece of farmland was not inherent, but was determined by its fertility and location relative to the market. The most fertile, well-located land was cultivated first. As population grew and demand increased, society was forced to farm poorer, more distant land. The rent for the prime land was then calculated as the difference in productivity between that superior plot and the worst plot still in use. Rent was not a reward for ownership, but a mathematical surplus generated by nature's uneven gifts. Meanwhile, Thomas Malthus was building a far grimmer mathematical model. He observed that human population, when unchecked, tended to grow geometrically, like the numbers 2, 4, 8, 16. Food production, however, could only increase arithmetically, like the numbers 2, 3, 4, 5. His model was a terrifying race between these two curves, a prediction that population would inevitably outstrip the food supply, leading to what he called positive checks, famine, disease, and war that would brutally restore the balance. This was perhaps the first major attempt to model societal collapse as a mathematical certainty. Together, these thinkers established economics as a science of equilibrium and margins. They searched for the stable states toward which economies naturally tended, and they began analyzing the effect of small, incremental changes, the marginal cost of producing one more unit, or the marginal utility gained from consuming one more good. Their work was a monumental shift, creating the first truly mathematical theories of society and setting the stage for an even more radical transformation. What would happen when these economic principles met the formidable power of 19th century physics and calculus? The result would be a revolution that attempted to turn the entire human experience into a single, solvable equation. A strange new question began to haunt the halls of academia in the 1870s. What is the exact value of one more? What is the worth of a single additional cup of water when you are desperately thirsty? And how does that value change after you have already drunk 5 cups? This seemingly simple puzzle was solved simultaneously by 3 thinkers working in isolation, and their answer would detonate a revolution. William Stanley Jevons in England, Carl Menger in Austria, and Leon Walras in Switzerland all arrived at the same powerful concept, marginal utility. They realized that value is not inherent in an object, but is a calculation happening in the human mind, a function of how much we desire one more unit of something. The first slice of bread to a starving man is priceless, the 4th slice is merely pleasant, and the 10th slice might be unwanted entirely. This diminishing marginal utility was the key that finally unlocked a mathematical explanation for price. Why is water, which is essential for life, so cheap, while diamonds, which are mere luxuries, so expensive? Because the price is not set by the total utility of water, but by the marginal utility of the last cup you consume. Since water is so abundant, that last cup has very low marginal utility, and thus a low price. This was a profound shift, turning economics from a study of grand societal classes into a science of individual, incremental choice. Leon Walras took this mathematical vision to its ultimate conclusion. He imagined the entire economy as a vast, interconnected machine, with every market for every good linked to every other. To model this, he constructed a system of simultaneous equations, a breathtakingly complex algorithm where the supply of boots depended on the demand for leather, which depended on the wages of shoemakers, which depended on the price of bread. He argued that if you could solve for all these variables at once, you would find the general equilibrium, the precise set of prices where every single market in the entire economy clears simultaneously. It was a theoretical masterwork, a mathematical proof that the chaotic market could, in theory, achieve a state of perfect, self-balancing harmony. To power these new models, economists borrowed the most powerful tool from physics, differential calculus. Calculus is the mathematics of continuous change, and it was perfectly suited to model the subtle shifts of human decision-making. An economist could now take a function describing, for instance, the relationship between the price of a good and the quantity demanded, and use a derivative to calculate the exact rate at which demand would change for any tiny increase in price. This allowed them to model optimization with surgical precision, finding the exact point where a consumer maximizes their satisfaction or a firm maximizes its profit. Jevons declared with conviction that economics must henceforth be considered a mathematical science, concerned not with vague philosophies but with quantities. The marginal revolution had succeeded, transforming economics from a qualitative discourse into a rigorous quantitative discipline. The marketplace was no longer just a phenomenon to be observed. It was a colossal set of equations waiting to be solved. This new mathematical worldview, however, came with a cost. In their quest for calculable precision, were these economists beginning to lose sight of the messy, unpredictable human beings who actually powered the system? The dream was seductive in its mathematical purity. Why leave the fate of nations to the unpredictable chaos of the market, when a team of brilliant planners with a perfect algorithm could orchestrate prosperity for all? In the early 20th century, this was not a fantasy, but a state-sponsored mission. the Soviet Union embarked on the most ambitious economic calculation in human history, an attempt to replace the invisible hand with a visible, all-knowing central brain. Their primary tool was the material balance table, a colossal input-output matrix that tried to map the entire industrial ecosystem. Planners would sit in Moscow with stacks of these tables, attempting to solve a single, gargantuan equation. If the steel industry needed 1 million tons of coal, and the coal mines needed 10,000 new steel drills, and the drill factory needed electricity from a plant that required more steel, every single dependency had to be identified, quantified, and balanced. It was a breathtakingly complex web of if-then statements, a logistical algorithm of staggering scale, all computed by hand. Into this monumental challenge stepped a mathematical visionary, Leonid Kantorovich. Confronted with the real-world problem of optimizing production in a plywood factory, he invented an entirely new field of mathematics, linear programming. This was a method for finding the very best outcome, like maximum output or lowest cost, in a situation with thousands of constraints. It was the ultimate optimization algorithm for a world of limited resources, a way to calculate the most efficient way to assign lathes to factories or trucks to distribution routes. His work was so powerful it would eventually earn him the Nobel Prize, a testament to the sheer intellectual force behind the planning dream. The central planners truly believed that with enough data, enough processing power, and the right equations, they could eliminate the waste and cruelty of booms and bustles. They saw the market as an archaic, bug-ridden program, and they were writing the new, perfect code. Yet the system, for all its mathematical elegance, crumbled in practice. The plans were always out of date, based on information that was months old by the time it reached the center. Local factory managers, desperate to meet their assigned quotas, would hoard materials or produce comically useless goods like boots only for the left foot, just to hit their numerical targets. The human element, with its ingenuity and its deceit, constantly broke the pristine logic of the model. This grand experiment stands as a monumental lesson in the limits of computation. It proved that an economy is not merely a complex system, but a profoundly complex adaptive system, one that learns, reacts, and evolves in ways that no static equation can ever fully capture. The planners had the right intuition that markets are algorithms, but they failed to grasp that the most powerful economic algorithm is not designed from the top down, but emerges unpredictably and beautifully from the bottom up. The dream of total control had faltered, but a new, more pragmatic mathematical ambition was taking its place. Instead of trying to command the economy from the top down, a new generation of thinkers asked a humbler question: what if we could simply listen to it? The rise of econometrics gave them the ears to hear. Pioneers like Ragnar Frisch and Jan Tinbergen began treating the economy not as a philosophical idea, but as a vast, noisy dataset. Their goal was to filter out the chaos and find the underlying mathematical rhythms, the true signals in the static of market data. They built the first comprehensive models of entire national economies, intricate webs of equations designed to forecast the booms and busts of business cycles. This was no longer just theory, it was an attempt to build a mathematical crystal ball. At the heart of this new science was regression analysis, a powerful statistical tool. Imagine trying to understand how the price of wheat affects the price of bread. Regression allowed an economist to take decades of data and calculate, with a precise numerical coefficient, exactly how much a 1% increase in the wheat price typically drives up the cost of a loaf. It turned vague notions of cause and effect into quantifiable, testable relationships. A theory was no longer just elegant, it had to fit the numbers. Governments, still reeling from the Great Depression, seized upon this new power. For the first time, a finance minister could look at a statistical model and ask, what will happen to unemployment if we cut taxes by 5%? They began using these econometric forecasts to fine-tune their economies, attempting to smooth out recessions and curb inflation through calculated mathematical intervention. This was the birth of technocratic management, the belief that policy could be guided by algorithms instead of ideology. The work was formalized by the Cowles Commission, a research group that became the methodological engine room for this entire movement. They rigorously connected abstract economic theory with the messy reality of statistical estimation, creating the foundational toolkit for modern empirical economics. This development marked a crucial evolution. Economies were now seen as systems that could not only be understood through mathematics, but predicted and managed with statistical algorithms. Yet this new power raised a haunting new dilemma. If your model is built on past data, what happens when the future decides to rewrite all the rules? Yet the most profound mathematical insight into human conflict would not emerge from economics at all, but from the analysis of a simple poker game. In 1944, the polymath John von Neumann and the economist Oskar Morgenstern published their monumental work, Theory of Games and Economic Behavior. They proposed that every competitive situation, from corporate rivalry to international diplomacy, could be modeled as a game with a strict mathematical structure. This was a new kind of algorithm, one designed not to calculate prices, but to predict the strategic moves of thinking, rational opponents. The core of their framework was the payoff matrix, a simple grid that laid out every possible move for every player and the resulting consequences for each combination of choices. This matrix transformed a messy, psychological battle into a clean, solvable mathematical puzzle. The implications for markets were immediate and staggering. An oligopoly where a handful of large firms dominate an industry was no longer a vague power struggle. It became a formal game. Each company's decision on how much to produce or what price to set was a move in a continuous match, with each player anticipating and reacting to the other's likely strategies. Game theory provided the mathematical language to model this delicate, often unspoken, dance. The most famous solution concept arrived with John Nash, who defined a state of perfect strategic balance. The Nash equilibrium occurs when every player in the game, knowing the strategies of all the others, has no incentive to change their own plan. It is a mathematical prediction of a stable, if not always happy, outcome. Imagine two competing food carts on a beach. If they both end up stationed at the midpoint, that is a Nash equilibrium. Neither vendor can move away without losing customers to the other. They are trapped in a mathematically predictable stalemate. This logic was weaponized in the design of auctions. Governments sitting on valuable assets, like radio spectrum licenses, needed a way to sell them that maximized public revenue while ensuring the licenses went to the companies that valued them most. Traditional auctions were vulnerable to collusion or strategic underbidding. Using game theory, economists designed entirely new auction formats with intricate rules that encouraged bidders to reveal their true valuations. The bids themselves became inputs to a sophisticated algorithm, one engineered to produce the most efficient and profitable outcome for the seller. This mathematical approach revealed a fundamental truth that Adam Smith's invisible hand had missed. Markets are not just blind mechanisms finding a balance between supply and demand. They are intricate theaters of strategy, where every participant is constantly trying to outthink and outmaneuver the others. Every price tag, every advertising campaign, every decision to launch a new product is a move in a vast, multi-layered game, with its outcomes governed as much by mathematical logic as by human desire. The marketplace was now understood not as a machine, but as a mind, a collective intelligence constantly calculating its next move. But what happens when the players in this game are no longer human, when the strategic mind making the calculations is itself a creation of silicon and code? The final piece of the puzzle arrived not from an economist but from a physicist. In 1973, Fisher, Black, and Myron-Scholes, with crucial contributions from Robert Merton, unveiled a mathematical oracle for the modern age. Their creation, the Black-Scholes Formula, was a complete algorithm for pricing financial options, transforming a murky art into a precise calculation. An option is a contract giving the right to buy or sell an asset at a set price before a certain date, a bet on future uncertainty. Before this formula, pricing these contracts was a guessing game, a blend of intuition and luck. Black-Scholes changed everything. It treated the market not as a psychological battle, but as a physical system, its movements obeying statistical laws similar to the random motion of particles. The formula itself was an elegant piece of calculus, taking 5 clear inputs: the current stock price, the option's strike price, the time until expiration, the risk-free interest rate, and the critical, elusive factor of volatility. Plug these numbers in, and the equation spat out a single, definitive number, the fair value of the option. This was the ultimate translation of risk into a price tag. The formula's power was not just in its accuracy, but in its transparency. Suddenly, every trader with a calculator could speak the same mathematical language. A Chicago pit trader and a London banker could now agree on the price of a complex derivative because the algorithm gave them a common, indisputable reference point. This standardization was like inventing a universal grammar for risk, and it unlocked a flood of new financial activity. The options market exploded in size and sophistication. For the first time, institutions could hedge their bets with mathematical certainty, using options as insurance policies against market downturns. A pension fund worried about a stock crash could now buy a precise number of put options, calculated by the model, to protect its portfolio. The formula created a new tool for managing the inherent chaos of the market, but this mathematical elegance came with a hidden fragility. The entire model rested on the assumption that market volatility was a predictable, steady force. It could not account for a sudden, violent rupture in the system, a day when the rules of physics no longer seemed to apply. Furthermore, as every major bank began using the same formula to price their risks, they all became vulnerable to the same blind spots. The model did not just describe the market, it began to shape it, creating a dangerous homogeneity where one flawed assumption could ripple through the entire global system. The Black-Scholes Formula was a stunning triumph of financial mathematics, a testament to the power of an algorithm to build entirely new worlds of commerce. Yet it also served as a grave warning that the most beautiful equations can create invisible threads that tie the entire system together, only to snap in unison when the calculation finally fails. If the market was a perfect information machine, then every stock price was its flawless output. This was the radical promise of the efficient market hypothesis, the ultimate theoretical expression of a world governed by financial algorithms. It proposed a stunningly simple yet profound idea: that at any given moment, the price of a stock or a bond already reflects every single piece of public knowledge. Every earnings report, every news headline, every rumor whispered on the trading floor, all of it is instantly digested and perfectly baked into the current market value. In its strongest, purest form, this hypothesis suggested that financial markets were the most sophisticated computers ever devised, processing infinite streams of data with impossible speed and accuracy. This created a world where the very concept of a smart investment was an illusion. If prices are always correct, then no amount of research or genius can give you an edge. Beating the market consistently would not be a matter of skill, but of pure, random luck. The entire dizzying spectacle of the trading floor, with its shouting and gesturing, was reduced to a mathematical random walk, where each day's price change was statistically independent from the last, as unpredictable as the next step of a staggering drunk. This theory did not just describe the market, it completely redefined the goal of investing. Why pay expensive fund managers to pick stocks if their efforts are futile? The logical conclusion was to stop trying to win the game and instead just own the entire board. This mathematical insight gave birth to the index fund, a passive investment that simply buys a little piece of every major company, mirroring the market itself. It was an admission that the collective algorithm of millions of traders was smarter than any single human mind could ever hope to be. The debate over the hypothesis rages on, of course. Can markets really be that efficient? Do bubbles and crashes not prove they are driven by emotion and error? Yet even its critics operate in the world it created. The enduring power of the efficient market hypothesis is not in its absolute truth, but in its framing of the entire financial universe as a single, breathtakingly complex calculation, a grand algorithm whose final answer is the price of everything. The mathematical crystal ball of efficient markets had one glaring flaw. It assumed the people inside it were perfect calculating machines, but human beings are not cold, rational processors of information. We are messy, emotional, and gloriously inconsistent. This inconvenient truth sparked a quiet revolution in economics, one that would force numbers to finally make room for human nature. Beginning in the late 20th century, researchers like Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky began meticulously documenting the ways our minds systematically betray us when faced with uncertainty. They did not see these errors as random noise, but as predictable patterns, cognitive biases hardwired into our psychology. The anchoring effect, for instance, shows how we cling to the first number we hear, letting an arbitrary starting point distort our sense of value. A house priced at $1 million can make a similar house listed at $900,000 seem like a bargain, even if its true value is far lower. This is not rational calculation, it is a mental shortcut, an algorithm in our own brains that sometimes leads us astray. Their most profound contribution was prospect theory, a mathematical model that dethroned the cold logic of expected utility. It proved that we do not evaluate gains and losses with cool detachment. We feel the pain of a loss far more acutely than we feel the pleasure of an equivalent gain. Losing $50 ruins your day more than finding $50 makes it. This asymmetry, this loss aversion, is a powerful force that can be plotted on a graph and quantified. It is a mathematical law of emotional response. Suddenly, the grand puzzles of the financial world began to make new sense. Market bubbles were not just moments of collective insanity, they were the predictable outcome of herd behavior and overconfidence. A market crash was not merely a statistical outlier, it was a stampede driven by panic and the overwhelming fear of loss. Behavioral finance provided the missing link, showing that these anomalies were not exceptions to the rules of economics, but were, in fact, rules of their own, written in the language of human psychology. This new understanding forced a fundamental shift. Building a realistic market algorithm could no longer be about modeling an idealized, rational actor. It now had to account for the flawed, emotional, and often irrational human being making the decisions. The most important and complex algorithm in any market was not running on a server in Wall Street. It was running inside the human mind with all its glorious imperfections. So if our own minds are the ultimate source of market unpredictability, what happens when we try to replace them with something infinitely faster and utterly without emotion? The floor of the stock exchange is now mostly silent. The frantic shouts of human traders have been replaced by the quiet hum of server racks, a new kind of market where the primary actors are lines of code. These are the algorithms of high-frequency trading, digital entities that perceive time in microseconds. They do not invest in companies or believe in growth stories. They execute trades based purely on mathematical signals, buying and selling thousands of times per second in a relentless search for microscopic price discrepancies. Imagine two nearly identical stocks trading on different exchanges. For a fraction of a millisecond, a tiny gap opens between their prices. A human could never even perceive this opportunity, but a high-frequency trading algorithm is built to pounce. It buys the slightly cheaper stock and sells the more expensive one simultaneously, locking in a profit that might be a fraction of a cent per share. Multiply that by millions of shares executed thousands of times a day, and you have a business model built on the pure, relentless arbitrage of mathematics. These are not simple programs. They are sophisticated mathematical models powered by machine learning, constantly training themselves to recognize new patterns in the chaotic flow of market data. They analyze correlations between asset prices, the order flow of other traders, even the sentiment in news headlines, all in a quest to predict the next micro-movement. The entire physical infrastructure of finance has been rewired for their benefit. Exchanges build specialized data centers where firms can co-locate their servers right next to the exchange's own matching engine. Private fiber optic cables are laid in perfectly straight lines, even tunneling through mountains, to shave milliseconds off transmission times between New York and Chicago. In this world, a few extra miles of cable can mean the difference between profit and obsolescence. We have created a digital ecosystem where algorithms are in a constant, invisible war with other algorithms. It is a new market ecology, a digital arena where the dominant species are lines of code competing for survival. This has undeniably brought benefits, primarily in the form of immense liquidity and razor-thin bid-ask spreads, making it cheaper for everyday investors to trade. Yet, it has also introduced profound new risks. The infamous flash crash of 2010, when the Dow Jones plummeted nearly 1,000 points in minutes before abruptly recovering, was a stark demonstration of this fragility. It was likely triggered by a single, large algorithmic trade that cascaded through the market, triggering a chain reaction of selling from other automated systems. The algorithms were simply doing their jobs, but their collective interaction created a momentary, terrifying collapse. This new reality forces us to confront a profound shift. The mathematical algorithms that once guided human markets have now, in many asset classes, become the market itself. So what happens when these digital traders step out of the financial world and begin to learn how to negotiate, to create, and to set the value of everything else? The silent war of trading algorithms was only a prelude. With the arrival of Bitcoin, the market did not just run on algorithms, it became one. The entire Bitcoin network is a single, distributed algorithm, a set of mathematical rules that governs the creation of new coins and validates every transaction across a globe-spanning network of computers. There is no central bank, no governing board, no physical vault. The entire system operates on a consensus of code, a trustless protocol where the rules are written in mathematics and enforced by cryptography. This was the final, logical step in a 4,000-year journey, the complete fusion of market and algorithm into a single, indivisible entity. The revolution did not stop with digital cash. Platforms like Ethereum introduced smart contracts, turning entire agreements into self-executing code. Imagine a simple escrow service for buying a used car. Instead of relying on a fallible human intermediary, you could encode the transaction into a smart contract. The algorithm would hold the buyer's funds in a digital vault. The moment the car's digital title is transferred to the buyer's name, the contract automatically releases the payment to the seller. This is a programmable market where the middleman is not a person, but an immutable piece of logic that cannot cheat or change its mind. This principle extends to the very way assets are traded. Decentralized exchanges do not use the traditional order books of the stock market. Instead, they rely on automated market makers, mathematical formulas that set prices dynamically. A simple version is a constant product formula. It might dictate that the total value of two paired assets in a trading pool, like Ethereum and a stablecoin, must always multiply to the same constant number. If a trader buys a large amount of Ethereum from the pool, the algorithm automatically adjusts the price higher for the next buyer, all according to its pre-programmed equation. The market maker is not a person or a firm. It is a few lines of code governing a pool of capital. We have now arrived at the purest expression of the ancient idea. These are markets composed entirely of mathematics, economic systems where the rules are not just guided by algorithms, but are literally made of them. This raises a set of profound and urgent questions. What does regulation mean when the market is a borderless piece of software? What is the role of human judgment in a world of unstoppable code? We have built an economy that is, in its very essence, a calculation, and that calculation is still running. A mathematical model is only as unbiased as the data it learns from. When we hand over critical decisions to algorithms, we often assume their calculations are purely objective, a perfect, emotionless form of justice. Yet these systems are built by people and trained on information from our own deeply flawed world. The result is that our newest market tools can silently automate and even amplify the very inequalities we hope to leave behind. Consider the algorithm that determines your credit score. It does not see your character or your struggles. It only sees a numerical profile built from historical data. If that data reflects decades of systemic disadvantage, where certain neighborhoods were denied loans or offered higher interest rates, the algorithm may learn to associate zip codes or even subtle spending patterns with higher risk. It is not intentionally bigoted. It is just mathematically perpetuating the shadows of past injustice, locking in historical bias with cold, digital efficiency. This pattern of encoded prejudice extends into the job market. Many large corporations now use automated hiring software to sift through thousands of resumes. These algorithms are trained to identify the ideal candidate by learning from the resumes of current high-performing employees. But if a company's workforce has historically been dominated by one demographic, the algorithm will learn to favor the educational backgrounds, extracurricular activities, and even the specific wording commonly found on that group's resumes. It might unfairly penalize a candidate who took a gap year for family reasons, or who graduated from a less prestigious college, effectively building an invisible wall that keeps the company's hiring patterns looking exactly as they always have. The algorithm is simply optimizing for a past version of success, mistaking correlation for causation. Even the simple act of shopping online is now subject to these invisible calculations. Dynamic pricing algorithms constantly adjust the cost of goods based on a torrent of data, including your location, your browsing history, and the device you are using. While this can sometimes lead to deals, it can also create a digital version of redlining. A customer in a wealthy postal code might be shown a higher price for a hotel room or a television than someone in a less affluent area. based solely on the algorithm's prediction of what each market will bear. This is not the old-fashioned haggling of the agora. It is a one-sided, data-driven extraction of maximum value, often targeting those who can least afford it. These examples reveal an uncomfortable truth that an algorithm is not a neutral mathematical construct. It is a mirror reflecting the values, priorities, and yes, the biases of the society that built it. The numbers going in are not raw, pure facts. They are the messy, complicated artifacts of human history. Recognizing this has sparked an entirely new scientific and ethical field dedicated to algorithmic fairness. Researchers are now developing sophisticated mathematical techniques to peer inside the black box of these models, searching for hidden patterns of discrimination. They create counter-algorithms designed to detect when a system is unfairly penalizing a protected group and to correct its outputs, forcing a kind of digital equity. This ongoing challenge is our final, crucial lesson. Markets may indeed be algorithms, vast and intricate calculations of value and desire, but these systems are our creations. They are built from our data, designed by our hands, and imbued with our own limitations. They require not just mathematical genius, but human wisdom, continuous ethical oversight, and a relentless commitment to refinement. The ultimate goal is not to eliminate these powerful tools, but to ensure they evolve, to guide them so they truly serve our social goals rather than quietly undermining the very fabric of a fair society. The calculation continues, and its next result depends entirely on the values we choose to program into it. A new kind of intelligence now reads the market's pulse, one that learns. Artificial intelligence and machine learning are not just faster calculators, they are pattern detectors on a superhuman scale. These systems can sift through petabytes of data, finding subtle correlations that no human analyst would ever notice. They might discover that a specific pattern of shipping traffic in the South China Sea, combined with a slight shift in the tone of central bank speeches, has a 98% probability of foreshadowing a shift in copper prices. This is not following a rule, it is discovering new ones, leading to a form of price discovery so efficient it borders on clairvoyance. The very nature of algorithmic trading is transforming. Older systems were rigid, executing pre-programmed commands like if the price drops 2%, then sell. Modern AI trading agents are adaptive learners. They continuously run millions of simulations, testing and refining their strategies against historical and synthetic market data. They learn from their mistakes and their successes, evolving their approach in a digital survival of the fittest. A strategy that worked last month may be discarded tomorrow if the AI detects a fundamental change in the market's underlying structure. This evolution is reaching the highest levels of economic stewardship. Central banks, the traditional human guardians of the economy, are now experimenting with AI for monetary policy. They are building massive simulations, digital twin economies where they can test the impact of tiny, algorithmic adjustments to interest rates or money supply before ever implementing them in the real world. The goal is to move from reactive policy to a form of continuous, preemptive calibration, fine-tuning the entire economy with the precision of a master engineer. To fuel these models, analysts are turning to alternative data streams that would have been unimaginable a generation ago. An AI does not just look at corporate earnings reports, it analyzes satellite images of parking lots at retail chains to estimate customer traffic. It scrapes millions of social media posts to gauge public sentiment in real time. It monitors global shipping movements, energy consumption, and even weather patterns, weaving all these threads into a hyperdimensional model of the world economy. We are approaching a threshold where markets could become truly self-optimizing systems. algorithmic ecologies that set prices, manage risk, and allocate capital with minimal human intervention. This future promises unprecedented efficiency and stability, but it raises profound and unsettling questions. Where does human agency reside in a world where the most critical economic decisions are made by inscrutable learning machines? How do we regulate a system that evolves faster than our laws can be written? We are building an economic reality that thinks for itself, and we must now learn how to live with the mind we have created. This long arc of history reveals a single, unifying truth: that markets have never truly been about money, but about mathematics. They are, and always have been, algorithms, intricate systems of calculation designed to coordinate our exchanges, allocate our resources, and define what we call value. From the first clay tokens in Mesopotamia to the self-learning artificial intelligences of today, the logic of commerce has been written in the universal language of numbers. Across 4,000 years, these market algorithms have evolved in their complexity, beginning with simple arithmetic and standardized weights, then absorbing the principles of probability, the power of calculus, the strategic insights of game theory, and now the adaptive genius of machine learning. This entire journey is the story of humanity refining its calculation of value. Seeing economics through this lens, as a continuous evolution of algorithmic systems, gives us a profound new perspective. We can appreciate the breathtaking power of these mathematical models to create wealth, foster stability, and connect the world. Yet we are also humbled by their limitations, their vulnerability to our own biases, and their inability to fully capture the messy, unpredictable wonder of human choice. As we stand at the threshold of a new era where markets are becoming increasingly autonomous and self-optimizing, this deep historical context is not just interesting, it is essential. It is our guidebook for navigating the immense challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. The sacred mathematics that once guided a merchant's hand in an ancient agora is still with us, not as a forgotten relic, but as a living, evolving force. The tools have transformed beyond recognition, from the abacus to the quantum computer, but the fundamental relationship remains unbroken. Mathematics and markets are eternally intertwined. I invite you to pause for a moment and consider how these invisible algorithmic principles shape your own financial life, from the interest on your savings to the dynamic price of your next online purchase. What patterns do you see? Share your reflections in the comments, and let's continue this fascinating conversation.